The Subcommittee on Space will come to order. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to today's hearing entitled An Overview of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Budget for Fiscal Year 2014. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and required truth and testimony disclosures for today's witness. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Well, good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to our hearing today, and I especially want to thank our witness, NASA Administrator Charlie Bolden, for joining us. I know many people put in a lot of effort preparing for these hearings, and we appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to appear before the subcommittee. The purpose of today's hearing is to review the administration's fiscal year 2014 budget request for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and to examine its priorities and challenges. Before we review the details of the NASA request, I feel it is necessary to express my disappointment that the administration has been unable to fulfill its responsibilities for a timely budget as required under the Budget and Accounting Act. In the future, I hope the administration will be on time. This year, NASA is requesting $17.7 billion, a decrease of $55 million from fiscal year 2012 and $733 million less than fiscal year 2011. In a time of budgetary restraints such as the one our nation is facing, we must ensure that every agency is doing its part, and I believe the top-line request for NASA is fair in this regard. There are several areas of the request that I believe require serious deliberation and thoughtful debate. Within the Human Operations and Exploration Mission Directorate, I am most concerned with the request for the Commercial Crew Program, the Space Launch System, and the Orion Crew Capsule. Certainly the successful launches of both SpaceX and Orbital Sciences are significant milestones, and they should be applauded for those achievements. However, I continue to be concerned about the strategy NASA is employing to fund crew transportation systems. We must recognize the times in which we are operating, and funding multiple companies to develop these systems is no longer, if funding multiple companies to develop these systems is no longer feasible, we must reevaluate our strategy. Our first priority must be getting American astronauts launching on American rockets from American soil as soon as safely possible. I am skeptical about continuing to develop a market as broad and as deep as NASA suggests because I think it could delay that goal. This is a conversation I anticipate revisiting as the committee prepares for the NASA reauthorization later this year. Additionally, I'm concerned about the request for the Space Launch System and the Orion Crew Capsule. While Congress continues to insist that these two programs be priorities, NASA has once again offered a budget that does not demonstrate the sustained commitment to their development. I remain committed to ensuring our nation has a robust exploration program, and I am curious what milestones or important testing NASA believes can be pushed out in the schedule to accommodate the lower requests. I'm also troubled by NASA's requested reductions in the Science, Aeronautics, and Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorates, while asking for $105 million for an asteroid retrieval mission that was announced seemingly out of the blue. This request was not accompanied by a budget profile, technical plan, or long-term strategy. Yet NASA has asked Congress to commit to funding the first steps. I look forward to hearing more about this mission and how NASA intends to cover the $2.6 billion that the Keck Institute for Space Studies estimated it would cost. In the Science Mission Directorate, the administration has requested authority to transfer several climate sensors from the troubled Joint Polar Satellite System and the Deep Space Climate Observatory out of the NOAA budget and assign them to the Earth Science Program budget. The budget request also transfers Landsat Data Continuity Mission follow-on activities from the U.S. Geological Survey to NASA, and the development infrastructure for radioisotope power systems from the Department of Energy to NASA. So I'm worried that NASA is footing the bill for other agency requirements, all while being asked to take an overall budget cut. Finally, I'm concerned by the growth of the space technology program. The request for the space technology program this year is a 62% increase over the appropriation it received in fiscal year 2012. This is a significant amount of growth in only 2 years. Although NASA has announced that it will organize space technology as a mission directorate, it has not requested authority to do so in the upcoming authorization bill, and it is not entirely clear how the projects in space technology differ from those in other mission directorates. Mr. Administrator, like you, I am committed to ensuring that our nation has a robust space program that will continue to lead the world for generations. I am concerned, however, that NASA has neglected congressional funding priorities and been distracted by new and questionable missions that detract from our ultimate deep space exploration goals. These distractions also take up precious lines in the budget at a time when NASA can least afford it. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlelady from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon and welcome to Administrator Bolden. Before I begin, I want to offer my congratulations to NASA and to Orbital on the test flight of the Antares launcher on Sunday. The successful test flight speaks well of the teamwork among Orbital, NASA, and the Wallops Flight Facility and the FAA, and including the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport and the Virginia Commercial Space Flight Authority. So congratulations. Now today we're meeting to review the $17.7 billion request for NASA's fiscal year 2014 budget. And I know, General Bolden, that it's not been easy getting to this point. With sequestration and the late resolution of the fiscal 2013 budget, we in Congress have not provided you with the optimal conditions under which to plan and implement NASA's inspiring portfolio of missions. But here we are. Now, I've said before, and I'll say it again, that our investments in research and development, including space, are investments in innovation, jobs, and future economic growth. If we skimp on the input side of the equation, we can't expect positive changes in our nation's capacity for innovation and growth. That's why we need to take a careful look at how the resources requested match the program content included in the fiscal year 2014 budget request. At the full committee hearing just last week on FY 2014 budget requests for science agencies, the President's science advisor, Dr. Holden, testified, and I quote, "NASA has long had the problem of 20 pounds of mission in a 10-pound budget, and they continue to. I share that concern. This proposal includes requests for NASA's key priorities, the James Webb Space Telescope, the International Space Station, and the Space Launch System, and Orion Crew Vehicle, along with its science and aeronautics programs and its infrastructure support. I worry that for all the work that NASA is tasked with doing to move forward towards fulfilling the 2010 NASA Reauthorization Act, that the agency is also cherry-picking aspects of that strategic plan that it finds favorable while undercutting other priorities in the law. For example, the 2014 budget request includes $105 million as a down payment to fund initial concept work on a mission that would demonstrate solar electric propulsion technology that is needed to capture a small asteroid, move it into translunar region, and then potentially use that asteroid as a target destination for the first crewed flight of the SLS and Orion system. In addition, the request includes $820 million a year over the next several years to fund the development of commercial crew capability for transporting astronauts to and from the ISS, a significant increase from the $400 and $500 million range that Congress has been willing to authorize and appropriate for those activities in the last 3 fiscal years. My fear is that I've already gotten to the 20 pounds of program content that Dr. Holdren was talking about in NASA's $17.7 billion request. And that doesn't include the unfunded new responsibilities for developing climate sensors that NASA's Earth Science program has inherited from NOAA, the $50 million increase required for full reimbursement now to the Department of Energy for resuming the domestic production of material that's needed to power deep space missions, or the 29% increase over fiscal year 2012 actual spending levels that's being sought for NASA's space technology program. To NASA's credit, the agency has been making progress in managing schedule and cost on its activities. The Government Accountability Office just recently issued a report that stated that NASA had success in the last 2 years in launching missions on cost or on schedule. I commend the agency and the contractor workforce on this progress. And yet the GAO also says that sustaining the changes that have led to these successes will be challenging within a period of flat or decreasing budgets and with the ongoing work on several large-scale and complex projects. Should any of the JWST, ISS, or SLS Orion programs experience a hiccup, the financial impact could have, and this is quoting GAO, cascading effects on the rest of the portfolio. Indeed, GAO's word of caution gives me pause since I don't see a lot of flexibility within the 2014 request for dealing with that situation. I hope today's discussion can clarify the rationale for the proposed asteroid and capture retrieval initiative proposed in the 2014 budget, and particularly how it contributes to detecting and characterizing 90% of near-Earth asteroids 140 meters in diameter or less. We've heard testimony in this committee about that, as set in policy and successive authorization acts. In these tight budgetary times, we need to be sure the proposed approach will be the most efficient means of achieving those objectives. So I look forward, Administrator Bolton, to what I hope will be a beginning of an active dialogue on both the policy and resources required to support NASA and in effectively implementing its challenging and inspiring portfolio. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield, well, not the balance of my time, but I do yield.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee for a statement, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. America is a nation of explorers, and space is the next frontier. Just last week, NASA announced the discovery of new worlds beyond our solar system that resemble our own planet. We in Congress need to be diligent in our review of the administration's proposed budget for NASA to ensure that this agency remains focused on its primary mission, space exploration. In April 2010, almost 3 years ago, President Obama addressed the NASA workforce at the Kennedy Space Center. He stated that the next mission for American astronauts beyond the International Space Station was an asteroid, and canceled NASA's many years of work to return to the surface of the moon. Last December, the National Academy of Sciences review of NASA's strategic direction made the following observation. The committee has seen little evidence that a current stated goal for NASA's human spaceflight program, namely to visit an asteroid by 2025, has been widely accepted as a compelling destination by NASA's own workforce, by the nation as a whole, or by the international community. On the international front, there appears to be continued enthusiasm for a mission to the moon, but not for an asteroid mission, end quote. Not having found a suitable asteroid for NASA astronauts, the President's budget now proposes a robotic asteroid retrieval mission to bring one closer to the moon. NASA's budget does not identify where the funding for such an asteroid retrieval mission will come from, but it is likely to detract from NASA's human spaceflight projects, the International Space Station, Orion Crew Vehicle, and Space Launch System. Further, the President's budget requests over $1.8 billion for NASA's Earth science programs. How does this high level of spending affect other NASA priorities, especially planetary exploration? Here are the priorities for NASA's exploration missions that have been consistent in congressional authorizations for the past 8 years. We need to make the International Space Station both an international and scientific success that will enable further exploration beyond Earth orbit. We need to build new systems to once again launch American astronauts on American rockets as soon as possible. Today, the U.S. pays Russia $63 million to take each of our astronauts to the station. While we support certain investments by NASA to fund private sector cargo and crew initiatives to support the station, Congress has been clear over the years that the Orion Crew Vehicle serve as a backup option. And finally, after receiving testimony from many engineers and astronauts, Congress has been insistent that in order to venture beyond low Earth orbit, a heavy-lift launch vehicle, NASA's Space Launch System, needs to be developed. The goal of NASA's human spaceflight program is to go to Mars and beyond on a path that includes returning to the moon or asteroids as necessary. This stepping stone approach for our exploration out of low Earth orbit is clear and unambiguous. While federal budgets will continue to be uncertain, congressional support for NASA's exploration mission is clear and unwavering. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I would like to introduce today's witness, the Honorable Charles F. Bolden, Jr., the Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. I now recognize Administrator Bolden to present his testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Let me thank you for the opportunity to appear today to discuss NASA's fiscal year 2013 budget request. Let me start by thanking the full committee as well as this subcommittee for your continued bipartisan support of NASA and the world's second-to-none civil space program. That support is also reflected among the American people in the White House, as evidenced by the President's $17.7 billion funding request for NASA. The budget reflects today's fiscal realities, and it aligns NASA's full spectrum of activities to meet the President's challenge to send humans to an asteroid by 2025 and to Mars in the 2030s. As part of the agency's overall asteroid strategy, NASA is planning a first-ever mission to identify, capture, and redirect an asteroid into orbit around the Moon. This mission represents an unprecedented technological challenge, raising the bar for human exploration and discovery, while helping protect our home planet and keep bringing us closer to a human mission to Mars in the 2030s. This budget also supports NASA's partnerships with American industry partners who are developing new ways to reach space. These partnerships are creating jobs and enabling NASA to focus on new technologies that benefit all of our missions. An industry partner, SpaceX, has begun resupplying the International Space Station with cargo launched from the U.S., and Sunday's successful test launch of Orbital Sciences Antares marks another significant milestone in NASA's plan to rely on American companies to launch supplies and astronauts to the International Space Station. Orbital is now poised for its first demonstration launch and mission to the ISS later this year. The administration is committed to launching American astronauts from U.S. soil within the next 4 years, and this budget provides the necessary resources to achieve this goal. This budget fully funds the International Space Station that remains the springboard to our next great leap in exploration. It also continues investments that are developing the SLS rocket and Orion crew vehicle that will take astronauts to deep space, and it supports driving the development of space technologies such as solar electric propulsion that will power tomorrow's missions and help improve life here on Earth. This budget continues to build on our nation's record of breathtaking scientific discoveries and achievements in space, with science missions that will reach farther into our solar system and provide critical knowledge about our home planet. Among other science goals, the budget will sustain NASA's vital role in helping us understand Earth's system and climate and the dynamics between our planet and our sun. These efforts will provide critical knowledge about our home planet and potential threats. We will continue our steady progress toward our next great observatory as we develop the James Webb Space Telescope, scheduled to launch in 2018. NASA's program of innovative aeronautics research is pursuing an ambitious research agenda for substantially reducing aircraft fuel consumption, emissions, and noise. With the 2014 requests, NASA begins a new $25 million a year advanced composites project that will focus on innovative composite materials and structures. Mr. Chairman, we've had to make some pretty tough choices with this budget, but I'm committed to making sure NASA is using its resources strategically for a cohesive exploration program that bolsters our economy, improves life on Earth, and raises the bar of what humans can achieve. I look forward to your questions.
I want to thank again the witness for being available for questioning today. I also want to remind members that committee rules limit questioning to 5 minutes. The chair will at this point open the round of questions. Administrator Bolden, under current top line funding levels, what is the cost schedule confidence level for SLS being operational by 2017?
So if you're asking about the joint confidence level number, I don't think we've finished developing that yet, but I will get to it for certain. But I will say that I know it will be a number with which I will be very comfortable for a number of reasons. Unlike other brand new programs, SLS is an evolving system in which we're using previously proven hardware, if you will. The shuttle main engines are the main propulsion system for SLS in the beginning. We are using, granted, a 5-segment solid rocket motor as the initial boosters for the system, but it's still very well proven technology. Orion has been through now 2 programs, Constellation and presently the Orion program itself. So we're at a level of maturity with those programs that we would not ordinarily be with another program. So I'm very confident in our cost estimates We have had an independent cost assessment done that has been available to this committee and Congress for about a year or so now, in which they assessed that our estimates were well-founded, that the process for determining what we thought the cost would be was grounded in good budgeting and cost planning. They cautioned us that we probably could use more, but as I think I've told this committee and others before, I don't remember a time that we couldn't use more to buy down risk on any of our projects.
So you don't have a joint confidence level percentage right now?
We don't have a joint confidence level percentage right now because we have not reached what we call the key decision point C, which is the point at which we determine whether we're going to go forward with a program. If that number came out to be really bad, which I don't anticipate, it might dictate that that a program be canceled, but I don't anticipate that at all.
When can this committee expect one?
Mr. Chairman, I'll get back to you. I think we're having, I think the KDPC is sometime this summer, but I'll get back. I'll get that for the committee.
Well, if there's not an official joint confidence level, what would General Bolden say it would be? As a percentage?
That's what I said. My guess is that
a percentage.
That my guess, and I shouldn't do this. No, let me not. Okay, I shouldn't, and I won't.
Well, I just want to remind you. I mean, if the SLS is one of NASA's top priorities, and we in this committee would look forward to seeing a joint level of confidence, confidence level as soon as possible. Yes, sir. All right. The administration's budget request for the Space Launch System includes a reduction of $60 million. How was this reduction calculated?
Mr. Chairman, let me make sure I understood. Were you saying that the budget shows a $60 million decrease?
Decrease, correct.
In SLS and the vehicle itself?
Yes.
We have, from the beginning, we used to give you one line for SLS. And every time we came back with a budget, there was always a lot of confusion, and okay, that's less money than we told you to spend on SLS. So we now have started breaking out the system into the vehicle itself, which is SLS, exploration ground systems, which is included in 21st Century Launch Complex at the Kennedy Space Center, its construction of facility upgrades at Stennis, and we try to break those out individually now. So while there may be what seems to be a reduction in funding deliberately applied to the vehicle, I think our budget numbers have been relatively consistent from what the Human Exploration Operations Mission Directorate has said we needed for the program from the very beginning.
Can you identify the parts of the program that we're either eliminating or reducing?
We're not eliminating anything. To my knowledge, we're not reducing anything in the program. But what we're trying to do is more definitively document the amount of money that's going toward the B-2 test stand upgrades at the Stennis Space Flight Center. That was not spelled out in the budget before, and now when you look under what we call CECR, the Construction of Facilities account, you'll see a specific reference to the B-2 test stand. You will see a specific reference in the write-ups to advanced boosters, which we think is very critical, not to the 70 metric ton version of SLS, but we will need it when we move up to 150 metric ton version, and we can't wait until we need it in 2025 to start constructing it. So those are numbers that I count toward SLS, but the committee may not attribute to SLS.
So just to clarify, with the reduced funding, you don't see any anticipated missed deadlines for SLS?
I don't anticipate any missed deadlines, and I would remind the committee, and I think, Mr. Chairman, you know probably better than anybody sitting in this room, because you've seen more than I have at Stennis. We have been testing the J2X consistently at Stennis, very successfully. We've got 500-second tests several times now. We are running tests at ATK with the boosters. We have gotten Orion where it is ready. It's almost ready to fly in the fall of 2014. We could tick off the achievements in both SLS and Orion that meet our milestones, and we've not, with one exception that I know of, which is delaying or putting off the airborne abort test for Orion, which we don't need for many years. We delayed that so that we could get some other things done.
Okay. I now recognize Ms. Edwards for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a statement that's submitted by the Planetary Society expressing concerns about the fiscal year 2014 budget that I'd like to request be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Bolden, I want to start by asking you about your budget because it seems that it assumes that the sequestration will end. And so I want to know what you believe would happen if sequestration continues to affect the NASA budget in 2014 and beyond, and what would be the likely impacts, and have you thought about the planning for that in terms of new initiatives in fiscal year 2014, such as the asteroid mission? Would that be eliminated? How would you translate your priorities for 2014 into funding decisions in the event that sequestration continues?
Congresswoman, first of all, let me confirm your assumption about the budget itself. The 17.7 is based on the President's confidence that he will be able to work out an agreement with this Congress in the budget for fiscal year 14 that will negate the sequester. So that is a correct assumption. If this Congress and the administration are unable to do what the American public expects, and we have to deal with sequestration for a 10-year period of time, to be quite candid, all bets are off. And things that we talk about, what I do now when I come to this committee and say we are fully funding all of our priorities, I can't do that. It goes back to, it puts more than 20 pounds in a 5-pound sack, and we will not be able to do that. Examples would be some of the testing that's necessary for our commercial crew program will have to slip. Several of you have referenced the amount of money that we consistently ask for commercial crew program and say, why do we keep doing that? The reason we keep asking for, at first, $1 billion annually for the commercial crew program, and then we decided, okay, maybe we can make it for $822 million. What I explained to the committee 4 years ago was if we don't get, back then it was $1 billion, we won't be able to deliver commercial crew program in 20.
What about the asteroid mission? What happens to that?
The asteroid mission will probably go away. Congresswoman, you know, we are in the stage of developing the asteroid mission. The President requested $105 million for a strategy. That's everyone needs to understand. That's not the mission. It is an asteroid strategy that includes $78 million for the development of the mission itself in the Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate.
So, General Bolden, let me ask you about that, because in the National Academy's 2012 report on NASA's strategic direction found that there's actually little support for an asteroid mission in the science community. What's your overall objective? And your testimony, as you've just described, refers to an overall asteroid strategy. Can you describe that strategy? And if you don't have it here, can you give it to us for the record?
I can describe it because it's relatively simple, and I would have to refer back to the April 18th hearing. I think it was April 18th when we met on asteroids. Dr. John Holdren, General Shelton, and me, and I think it was, I can't remember whether it was Congressman Brooks or Congressman Posey, to whom I responded after much of their frustration that the only thing we could do today was pray. The asteroid strategy gives us the capability of being able to increase the number of asteroids that we identify that threaten Earth, to characterize them such that we can determine how we reach them. We're developing a process or a technology that will come forward in the asteroid retrieval mission that will demonstrate that humans can, in fact, alter the path of an asteroid that's headed toward Earth. So these are very important parts of the asteroid strategy. It is.
So, but let me just interrupt you for a minute. I apologize, but are you saying to us then that the goal is an asteroid and the capture and retrieval of an asteroid, or is the goal an interim step to Mars?
The goal of our program is to remain the world's leader in space exploration, to meet the President's goal for us, or challenge for us, of putting humans in Martian orbit in the 2030s. That is the ultimate destination for humans, and we must not lose track of that. An asteroid is an intermediate destination on the way to our ultimate destination of Mars. An asteroid mission must stand by itself, however. And so as a part of the strategy, the asteroid mission answers several other questions that have been asked of us, or challenges that have been given to us. Putting a human with an asteroid, that is one that the President expressed to us. This committee and others in this Congress and the National Space Policy demands that we be able to identify, as you said, 100% of the asteroids that are 40 meters or less, and this is one of the ways that we intend to move toward answering those questions for the nation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope we'll be able to get to follow up with this. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. We're going to try to get through as many members as possible, but then we're going to recess for votes, but we're also going to return. So I now recognize Mr. Smith for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It sounds like a number of us have the same type of questions. And Mr. Bolden, you should not take these personally if we ask tough questions, because I think we all admire you as an administrator and appreciate the job you're doing. Let me go to the asteroid retrieval mission and follow up on that. NASA's Small Bodies Advisory Group reported, quote, "While the participants found it to be a very interesting and entertaining, it was not considered to be a serious proposal." Why would the administration dismiss the advice of those whose advice they sought?
I am not aware of that advice, to be quite honest. That's the first. I just
Really?
haven't seen that, sir. And
that Small Bodies Advisory Group.
I know what the Small Bodies Advisory Group is. I'm just not aware. I'm saying I'm not aware that they offered. I have in my possession the letter from the planetary system. Everybody generally CCs me on everything that comes to Congress,
Well,
so I won't be surprised. I'm surprised by this.
That was a direct quote. I'll get it to you
Yes, sir.
soon then.
Yes, sir.
The other question, this follows up a little bit as well. Everything I've seen makes me believe that scientists and others who are experts think that a moon landing rather than a rendezvous with an asteroid is a better precursor to a Mars mission. Would you agree with that, or do you think the asteroid is better preparation?
Congressman, I would agree with anyone who says that a moon landing is good. We've done it. We've done it 6 times, and it was incredibly good. Yeah. And
there's a lot more to do than what we've done so far.
There is so much more to do than what we've done so far. But if I go back to the premise that the chairman opened up with, that we can only do so much. And
which would be better for the Mars mission? Would it be back to the moon, or would it be the asteroid?
I don't think that either would be better. They both are good. In our particular case, since we're operating under a flat budget, the one that is executable in today's budget environment is an asteroid mission.
If various experts said the moon, would you heed their advice?
We get expert advice all the time, and we try to heed. However, I think Mr. Chairman, it is impossible to heed the advice of all experts. Some expert is going to feel that he or she is being disregarded. I have utmost respect for the National Research Council Committee that looked at us and said that there was no
pretty soon
interest in
on some
asteroids.
subject you're going to have to take the experts' advice, whether it be from
We are taking the advice of experts with
whether it be
this.
from the Small Bodies Advisory Group or for the others saying that the lunar mission would be better for the Mars mission. Next question is this: on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is one of our great scientific adventures. There is some concern about technical problems there. I think it's maybe overweight. I think there are 2 instruments that are running close to a year behind. Do you see us able to meet our deadlines and get the James Webb up in the fall, I think 2017 as expected?
Chairman Smith, I would have to ask for the source of the information. That is in direct contrast to what I get every week in terms of status of James Webb. We are 14 months ahead on the critical path toward flight.
So you're not,
for someone to say that we're a year behind with 2 instruments, and we have 2 instruments that we have been working quite a bit. The vendors have delivered NIRCam and NIRSPEC, and if they think they're a year behind, I need to know it.
Well, 11 months behind is what I.
If they think we're 11 months behind on those 2 instruments,
I keep coming up with all these news breaks.
Sir, that's a serious news break, because that would be contradictory to what the leadership of Northrop Grumman and NASA's James Webb Space Telescope program are telling the administrator.
That's
a serious
right. We'll get you our
absence of information to me if that's true.
Okay, we'll get your source on that as well.
Yes, sir. I would appreciate that, because I promised this Congress that I was responsible for the James Webb Space Telescope. I think you may remember when I stood here and I said, no one feels as bad about this as I do.
Right. The information that I just mentioned, the two instruments being 11 months delayed, was in a GAO report that came out last week.
I would have to go back and check with my... we have carried GAO by the hand through Goddard, through the Johnson Space Center and everywhere, and so if GAO is reporting that we have instruments that are 11 months behind...
GAO, April 2013, two of the instruments 11 months behind.
Mr. Chairman, I will get back to you.
Okay.
That is news to me.
Okay, thank you. Last quick question. I want to go back to what the Chairman mentioned about SLS beginning operations by 2017 as hoped. Do you think that's very likely, guaranteed, very likely, or probable?
I think if this Congress and the administration are able to solve the sequester problem, 2017 inaugural flight on the integrated SLS and Orion is very good. Nothing is ever a certainty in this business. Barring no accidents, barring a successful flight of Orion next year, we're well on the way to a 2017 inaugural flight of SLS and Orion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bolden. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And now recognize Mr. Kennedy for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, thank you very much for being here. I thank the committee for calling the important hearing. General, just a couple of questions for you. I understand, shifting gears a little bit from the asteroid mission to something that's near and dear to my district, is the STEM education programs that you have at NASA. And I understand from the budget materials that there's been a reorganization and a consolidation of some of those priorities through the administration, and focusing on 4 priority areas, and consolidating programs into 3 different agencies. So my question to you, sir, is there any thought on how this transition is going to, well, you can minimize the disruption to some of these programs that are extraordinarily popular and important to school children as young as kindergartners. In my district, there's a number of education programs that have been extraordinarily successful. I was at one recently in Sharon. There's about 1,200 students learning about space and STEM, training to be an astronaut. One of the high schools, the Tri-County High School in Franklin, was one of only 8 high schools in the country that were selected to participate in United with NASA to create a hardware program last year. Far more interesting science class than I ever took, building robots trying to come up with ways for astronauts to scramble eggs in space, which I'm sure is probably something useful to you. So how can we ensure, General, that programs like these that are already highly successful and are inspiring an entirely new generation of engineers don't disappear?
Congressman, I would have to, in answering your question, I need to go back and tell you what I think is successful. When I became the NASA administrator, I asked for metrics. I'm not an engineer, but I play with a lot of them, and so I've learned to have an appreciation for metrics, to demonstrate that something is successful or valuable. When I asked what the metrics were on the effectiveness of our K through 12 STEM education program, I got blank stares. I was told that we touch 1 million kids a year, and I said, okay, I got it. But what effect have we had on those 12 million kids? Did I take one who was not interested in science and have them, when they get to high school, take very difficult science and math courses and go to college and major in engineering? And the answer I got was, we don't know. And I said, well, how do we know we're effective? I feel good, you know, because I go out and talk to school kids all the time. I feel great. But have I made a difference in their life? And the only way I have to know that is metrics. The President and I happen to share this belief, and so what we're trying to do with the consolidation of the STEM education programs across the 13 or so STEM-related agencies in the government, and I see Congresswoman Edwards is smiling because she and I have talked about this at length. I think she shares my passion for metrics and demonstrating that we are effective in what we do. We are not able to demonstrate our effectiveness today. The President is tired of it, and so he has said, we're going to try something new. When you try the same thing over and over and the same answer, it's not working. You ought to try something new. NASA is assuming a leadership role, if you will, in helping to craft this new consolidated STEM education program. And I would caution everyone, nothing is changing right now. We have a long time remaining in this fiscal year, so the programs in existence continue to go. In NASA, programs like MUREP, EPSCoR, Space Grant, all of the critical programs that we uniquely do that reach underrepresented minorities, tribal colleges and schools, those programs will remain even in the consolidated program. I don't do very well in being able to measure the effectiveness of my fellowships and scholarships. I'm told the National Science Foundation has a pretty good system, so we are going to work with them to help us identify the effectiveness of our fellowships and scholarships. I don't do well at all. I have no metrics for, well, I shouldn't say that. I don't do well with metrics for K through 12. I am told the Department of Education has a pretty good idea of how to establish those metrics. That's what we're working on to roll out effective the 2014 budget. So I think the kids that we're taking care of today will be taken care of, and my hope is we will be able to show you that we have an effect, not just tell you that I feel good because I touched 1 million kids.
Thank you.
Okay, as we know, a vote has been called. The committee will recess subject to the call of the chair, which I'd like to be about 5 minutes after the last vote in this series. Without objection, so ordered. The committee stands in recess. The committee will now come to order. I recognize Mr. Brooks for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to make a quick comment about your focus on asteroids. Personally, I concur. I think that's a good direction to go. At the same time, I'd add some benefit from the approach that the White House and you're recommending. First, I think it recognizes the risk to our country and our world. While at any point in time it is a small risk, over the accumulation of time it is a significant risk. Second, I think it's another reason why we need the Space Launch System to have the capability of doing whatever needs to be done. So I see it as a hand-in-glove effort. And finally, along those same lines, the technology that is developed, as the history of NASA has shown, it's not limited to just one thing. The technology that NASA develops is expansive and is useful in many different ways. Whatever technology we can develop by initiating efforts with respect to asteroids, I believe are beneficial. Now to a question about the Space Launch System, as you can imagine. Thank you for coming before our Tennessee Valley Chambers of Commerce that were here on Monday. We had roughly 180 people that came to the Hill, and I was very pleased to see that you were one of the speakers, and thank you for your remarks. The Space Launch System continues to receive less than the authorized levels, yet NASA is supporting not one but 3 different commercial crew programs, and if I'm reading the President's proposed budget correctly, he's proposing a 64% increase in funding for commercial crew, above the authorization bill level of $500 million, roughly from $500 million to $800 million, if the information I have is accurate. That being the case, why the big increase for commercial crew but not a similar increase for Space Launch System being requested?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Yeah,
if Mr. Palazzo doesn't mind, I don't mind.
No. Congressman, let me talk precise, exact numbers. If we took what we're requesting in the increase for commercial crew, which is from $525 million to $822 million, so $300 million. If I added $300 million to the SLS program, you wouldn't know it.
Well, I was thinking more of the 64% figure.
But that's my point, sir. Is that it depends on the numbers you use, and if you choose to use percentages, then percentage of a number like 500 million may seem very big. It's not big at all. We are trying to get close to the level that the President asked for when he decided to fund the Commercial Crew Program, which had not been done by any previous administration, to be quite candid. We have asked for, and I think Bill Gerstenmaier, the head of the Human Exploration Operations Mission Directorate, has stated over and over that this is the amount of money that we need to deliver SLS on the date and time that we said, 2017 for the inaugural mission, integrated with Orion, 2021 now for the asteroid mission perhaps, and I don't need more money than that. If you give me money to put against SLS, against the vehicle, it means I can't put some money that I would ordinarily put against advanced booster program.
Given our funding limitations, do you have a concern that there may be some duplication of effort, particularly in as much as we're funding 3 different private sector contractors in the commercial crew environment? Do you suggest keeping it at 3 or reducing it to 2 or reducing it to 1?
Congressman, our acquisition strategy, which we spelled out pretty well several years ago, and we had to modify because we didn't get the money requested, was that we would try to promote competition for as long as we could, and that at some point, which will be this summer, this spring, we're going to issue a draft request for proposal. The vendors will have an opportunity to look at that, tell us what they think. We'll issue a final request for proposal in the fall, and by next spring we hope to be able to announce who the commercial crew provider is going to be. My hope is that Congress will fully fund us to the $822 million level, and that may allow me to carry 1.5. It will not allow us to carry 3 vendors. If we go down to 1, if I'm forced to go down to 1 provider at any time, there is no competition. And it is exactly as I am. It will be exactly as I am today with the Russians and Soyuz seats. There is no competition. They went from 500 million.
I'm running out of time, and if the chairman would permit, I'll follow up one final question. Hopefully it will be a brief answer because it will be a brief question. The word commercial has always been puzzling to me because I'm not very familiar with a commercial or private sector market for commercial crew. Do you envision that commercial crew is in fact going to have as its primary, if not sole customer, the United States government?
I do not anticipate that. I believe industry when they say, when Boeing and Boeing's board of directors commit to a program as they have done with the commercial crew program, they're betting on the come.
Well, if you have any studies that suggest that there truly is a private market out there for quote-unquote commercial crew, if you could share it with me, I'd very much appreciate it.
I will make an effort to get some of the commercial companies to release what they provided to their boards of directors. I will try.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I now recognize Mrs. Wilson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. How are you
It
doing?
is my understanding that Congressman Kennedy mentioned STEM, and I'd just like to follow up because I'm concerned about potential funding shortfalls with regard to STEM. As you know, training a STEM workforce is essential to our economic competitiveness. And NASA's education programs, both within its mission directorates such as science and aeronautics, as well as within its Office of Education, have taken a significant hit in the FY 2014 budget proposal. It's a decrease of about 46% from FY 2012. Who made the decision on what education activities are proposed to be cut? Was the Interagency Committee on STEM involved? And what was OMB's role?
Congresswoman, I can't tell you what OMB's role was, but I can tell you what I did. I have been intimately involved in the decisions within NASA on STEM education because I think most people will tell you no one is as passionate about STEM education as am I. Our decision was, after we listened to the proposal that came from the President that he wanted, as I said a little bit earlier, he wanted to find a way to make the programs effective, that we would be able to measure the effect of the STEM education programs. We decided that we would go along with that effort. We had already been part of the way down the road with COSTEM that you mentioned. Their report, I think, is supposed to come out this summer, and we will integrate the work of COSTEM, 2 years' worth, into the consolidation effort that's ongoing right now. So I can tell you what we did. We participated in the decisions. I think what they did was across the board. It was decided to take all educational outreach funds from the agencies, the STEM agencies, to consolidate them rather than to try to cherry pick. They just, I think we took everything, except some special ones that I mentioned earlier that go to underserved minorities and like MUREP, EPSCoR, and then Space Grant, which covers everybody.
Just to follow up, what resources would the Smithsonian, Department of Education, and the NSF have as a part of the 2014 budget request to support infrastructure to work across government and to implement the proposed consolidation? How will that infrastructure compare to the proven structure that NASA has developed over time, which is supported through competitive selection and peer review to implement STEM education and outreach, especially within the Science Mission Directorate? How will you do that with a 46% cut?
My agency is really good. We're the best place to work in government, and I don't mean that pejoratively or anything. What will happen with the consolidation is that what I can do every day, bringing downlink TV from aboard the International Space Station, taking it into a classroom, every one of the STEM-related agencies will now have access to NASA content. So that's one of the things we're giving. We'll be allowing everybody else to have access to the content that we have. What it will give us, what we will gain, will be access to the Department of Education, to the National Science Foundation, and even to the Smithsonian in some of their metrics and some of their methods for promoting and reaching people with STEM education. I think there's value on both sides. Everybody gives, but everybody gets something if we do it right.
One follow-up. Who's going to oversee this? Who will oversee it? Which segment of government?
The program is actually
Department of Education?
The program is actually presently being overseen by the Executive Office of the President. The President is, is the one that all of us are responding to in this. I'm overseeing with Leland Melvin as my emissary, if you will, what we're doing in NASA, and every other principal is quite well aware of what's going on and is taking part, and we have all had an opportunity to express our opinion about how things should be done. Examples would be, one of the things we proposed was take the people from each agency, each STEM agency who are good at what they do, and put them in a pool so that when the Department of Education or the National Science Foundation or Smithsonian starts looking to build a cadre of people that are going to be the overseers, if you will, that we take people who have experience with this. And I express the desire and a willingness to offer NASA people anytime anybody wants to take them so that we make sure the program is done correctly.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.
I now recognize Mr. Stewart for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, good to see you again.
Always good to see you.
It's been a pleasure being on this committee and having a chance to get to know you a little bit. I'd like to be big picture if we could for all, and I certainly don't mean to beat a dead horse, and I don't think that we will, but help me if you could bring some clarity to, I think, some fundamental visions or goals of your organization. And that is, with the asteroid retrieval missions, what is the main objective or goal that you have there? And if I could maybe rephrase the question, help me understand why that was placed as a priority over other possibilities, say, for example, a manned moon mission.
Congressman Stewart, it doesn't, I would not say the asteroid mission replaces anything. We did not have a lunar mission in our portfolio. We had a $17.7 billion budget with a notional out, 5-year out, that would not accommodate a lunar mission. I think it is in the record that if we went back and tried to replicate the lunar program that was in place under Constellation, I've asked, and I'm told that Altair, the lander, is in the $8 to $10 billion range. I don't have $8 to $10 billion to put into a lander for a lunar program. We already had solar electric propulsion underway in our Space Technology Mission Directorate. We have had that for years. We think we can accelerate it with the funds that are coming, 40 million of the funds that are coming out of the 105. Human Exploration has been working for no less than 3 years on an asteroid-type mission. So we're leveraging what we have been doing for years. As Congressman Brooks mentioned, SLS and MPCV were made for the human exploration part of an asteroid mission. It gives us an opportunity to demonstrate that vehicle and its capability, Orion's capability to go beyond the moon to deep space, long before we have to make an 8-month mission to Mars, and hoping that our people will survive in that.
Well, and I think actually, General, you bring up my point, and that is, and this is actually my primary question. If your ultimate objective is to go to Mars, and knowing that there's building blocks that are required to do that, technological building blocks along the way that you have to accomplish in order to do that, does a lunar mission or the asteroid retrieval, does either of those give you a more significant foundation to build on, if that is your objective?
You asked the question a little bit differently than was asked earlier, and I thought about it. The chairman told me to think about it again and come out and say, forget about the asteroid mission. I'm not ready to do that yet. There is a decided advantage in an asteroid retrieval mission on the road to Mars. Solar electric propulsion is something we have got to have for deep space exploration. People have heard us say we are looking for game-changing propulsion. Solar electric propulsion has been around for a while, but not the way we want to use it. There are varieties. Solar electric propulsion is a big name for a lot of different things you can do. Hall thrusters, ion thrusters, VASIMR. That's one thing. Life support systems in the Orion module. I don't need to change the life support. I could take the existing life support system in the first Orion and go to the moon. So there is no technological advantage there. If I want to push technology, I want to go to deep space. I want to go somewhere where it's really, really, really challenging. And if we don't get it right, we're going to lose people.
And I appreciate that. And then if I could, in the minute or so that I have left, you've given some great examples of technologies which are developed with this mission. Are there any technologies that we sacrifice or that we would develop with another lunar mission that would not be developed in the?
It's not a matter of sacrificing technologies. It is a matter of requiring no new technology. We must remember. This is the greatest nation in the world in terms of exploration of the universe. We have been to the moon 6 times. We know how to do that. Now, Dr. Gilruth, who most of you don't know, once said at the end of the Apollo program, people will realize how difficult it was to go to the moon when we try to return. So just because we went once doesn't mean it's going to be easy the next time. I don't need any new technology to go to the moon. I need money to go to the moon. It is expensive to go into a gravity well of the lunar surface. I need new technologies to go to an asteroid in deep space or in a stable orbit rendezvous point around the moon. And we have already started investing in that technology, and the minimal amounts of money, somebody asked, why are we putting more money into technology development? Because we need it to fill the gaps. We have a technological roadmap that was certified by the National Research Council. This is not an overnight thing. We didn't just think of this. I have to correct members of the committee who have said several times it seems like we just thought this up. We have been working on this. NASA has been working on this for decades. The president focused us like a laser when he stood up at the Kennedy Space Center, and people don't relate it, and I'm not trying to relate it to John Kennedy, but there were people who thought the president had lost his mind when he stood in Rice University campus and said, within this decade, we're sending humans to the moon and bring them safely back. Gene Kranz, who is a role model of mine and a flight director, he is Mr. Failure is not an option. He said he went home, he said he thought the president had lost his mind. He woke up the next morning and he said, no, that's not the case. The president trusts us, and he thinks we can do this. To have the president of the United States go to Florida and say, NASA's going to send somebody to an asteroid in 2025 and to Mars in 2030, I couldn't be more proud.
Yeah.
You know.
And my time's, thank you, General. Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman.
I now recognize Ms. Bonamici for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, General Bolden, for returning and for your service to our nation. In a previous hearing in this committee, I pointed out some of the work that NASA does that affects Oregon's 1st District in several important ways, from education opportunities through the Space Grant Program to whale monitoring activities through NASA's National Ocean Partnership. And I wanted to ask you about the weather and climate monitoring. The marine economy in Oregon is very important to the coastal areas, and they rely on the data provided by NOAA and NASA. And in this NASA budget, I see that the Joint Polar Satellite System 2 climate sensors are being transferred from NOAA to NASA, but there doesn't appear to be an accompanying increase in NASA's Earth Science budget. So I wanted to ask you if you could please elaborate on how NASA is going to carry out this new responsibility. What are the criteria for having NASA assume responsibility, because we want to ensure that there are long-term measurements and observations that are sustained.
Congresswoman, I'll take it for the record to get the exact amount, but I think we did get a modicum of funding that came with the climate sensors, but I'll take that for the record. But I will say, just as we did with the Discover mission and others, we actually came to the House Appropriations Committee and said, look, we would like to take this on because we think this is very important. In the case of Discover, we have instruments that have already been built. They are already installed on the satellite. It makes no sense to us to take them off and put mass simulators on. And Chairman Wolf said, look, I don't want to do that, but give it your best shot. You know, send me a proposal and tell me what you're going to do. And we demonstrated to him how doing it a different way, we could bring it in at a much less cost than it had originally been proposed. And that's what we have become accustomed to doing. Somebody mentioned earlier the fact that many of our missions have come in on budget or under budget and on schedule recently, and it was attributed to an increase in budget. That's not the case. I attribute it to the incredible people I have who are working for NASA, who now have had a change of culture, if you will. They understand that we're not going to get any more money. And so they're looking for innovative ways to do things. We knew we couldn't get enough money for a classic asteroid mission. You know, that would be great if we could put humans in a big rocket and send them to an asteroid between Mars and Jupiter. Our budget is not going to allow that. Never, ever. I doubt it, unless we really do something big and you all decide to be generous. So we had to innovate, and we came up with the concept that is now the hallmark of an asteroid retrieval mission. So that's the way we do things.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask you about, I had a great conversation with members of the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. They were in town to talk about research funding, which is, of course, very important. We talked about the biological and physical science research that's done at the space station. As you know, there's a lot of research in space that affects medical care here. And I wonder, because of the potential for key medical advancements, is it surprising that what seems like a relatively small amount of the funding for ISS goes to research functions? So will you elaborate on that a bit?
I think we have priced it about right, the amount of money that we put in our human research program, and I think what you're looking at is HRP that's dedicated to astronaut health and safety. What is not seen in that number is the amount of money that goes into human research. For example, the National Institutes of Health has a grant program in the millions of dollars, and the grantees do work on the International Space Station. One stipulation: can't have anything to do with astronauts. It's got to be it has to impact life here on Earth. Now, if it happens to help astronauts, great. But we don't count that kind of money that's being spent. CASIS, which is now the non-governmental organization that is responsible for going out and recruiting, selecting, and then overseeing science experiments flown in the American segment of the International Space Station. Our utilization of space station is up. The number of experiments that astronauts are able to do now that construction is over is up. it's a dynamic laboratory, better than anything anybody's ever seen before.
That's terrific. I see if I can get one more question, and I understand that there's some work being done to develop a prototype exploration suit for use on board the ISS, and I wondered, is that a repurposing of the current, I guess it's the EMU that's used, or is it going to be replaced, and will there be a competitive process for that?
My understanding is it will replace the EMU. It is a suit that's made to operate in a near gravity, in a less than 1G environment of Mars. Looks like Buzz Lightyear, the one I've seen. You know, it's much less cumbersome. Much less hard on the shoulder joints, for example, where we actually have had injuries with astronauts in the current EMU. So it's a new development.
Terrific. And is it a competitive process for that?
It was chosen. It will be chosen through a competitive process. Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
My time has expired. Thank you, Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
sorry.
Thank you.
I now recognize Mr. Posey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, General, for joining us again. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, of all the agency heads that I've had the privilege to sit in, you've been the one that's been the most forthcoming and straight talking, and I appreciate that. Thank you. I don't want to get redundant. I just want to get these things in a proper perspective, just kind of for my memory bank here. The Keck study suggested that an asteroid mission would cost $2.6 billion. And I understand NASA disagrees with that number. And I was just wondering how much NASA thinks it will cost to retrieve and return an asteroid or remove it, whatever the goal ends up being.
Congressman Posey, I'll correct you and say we don't disagree with the Keck number.
Oh.
However, our mission, as we envision it, is different from what the Keck number on which it was based. Keck, very respected group of scientists who studied this, they did not have an SLS or an MPCV. They did not have a head start on solar electric propulsion. They assumed that we were going to use a big rocket and go between Mars and Jupiter into the asteroid belt to put humans with an asteroid. And so I think that's where the $2.6 billion came from. I have been cautioned by many, and so I will take their advice and not try to give you a number right now. We are going into mission formulation this summer. After we talk with our international partners, with academia, with amateurs, to be quite honest, to find out what this mission should have in it, and then we'll come back with a more definitive number on what we think it's going to cost. But my guess would be for a similar mission that Keck had, it'll be something less than their estimate.
Well, that's something, because certainly when you talk to people about appropriations, they want to know what's at the end of the line, and you know, if it costs as much to go to an asteroid or twice as much as going to the moon, I mean, that makes sense, and you can understand that. How would you compare the cost of the administration's LASSO mission with the return to the moon?
As best, let me, if I can use the example of the Keck study, and I'm not adopting that, but it is an example. An example is Keck says $2.6 billion to carry out their type of asteroid mission, which we think is more expensive than ours. The number quoted to me for Altair, for the lander, for a human lunar exhibition or landing, $8 to $10 billion. So going back to the moon, if we use the numbers quoted for Altair, which came from NASA, in the Constellation program, and we accept the numbers from Keck, then going to the moon is almost a factor of 3 more expensive. And our budget won't sustain that, won't accommodate that.
Yeah, and I heard that number when Congressman Stewart and you were having dialogue. What's that number based on?
The Keck number or the Altair number?
The return to the moon number. Return
to the moon. It is the number that I wasn't around, so I can't tell you, but I was quoted $8 to $10 billion for the lunar lander that was planned for the Constellation program. And one of the reasons that it never materialized was because NASA at the time did not have the funding.
Yeah. Can you get us a copy of that, just that documentation,
we can
just
do
so
that.
we'll have
Yes,
it, because I hadn't seen
do
that
it.
before. You know, could the hardware, obviously that's being developed, such as the SLS, be used for both missions? I mean, wouldn't we use the same rocket to go to the asteroid that we would to the moon? And
you would use, if we are going anywhere in deep space, and I will stipulate that we can call the moon deep space, but we don't consider the moon deep space anymore. But you could use SLS to go to the moon. You will use SLS to go to an asteroid, to Mars, and the like.
Okay. The next thing, of course, I was going to ask if there's anything salvageable from the $9 billion Constellation mission to nowhere.
We are using Orion quite effectively. We have gotten its cost down, its weight down, and it's on schedule to fly in 2014.
Okay. Because I think that might offset some costs if we've got some stuff in the ground.
And to be fair, we flew Ares 1X. Which was a part of the Constellation program. That was the last thing we did in the Constellation program. Ares 1X was the most heavily instrumented rocket to ever go in space. And the data that we collected from Ares 1X is now available to every rocket manufacturer in the country, plus any rocket manufacturer that is cleared to receive ITAR-related data, I think.
Yeah. When Kennedy set the goal of going to the moon within a decade, he literally inspired a nation. You might have known a skeptic, but you know, as a teenager, it inspired me and my entire generation. When we heard the idea of going to an asteroid and maybe doing 2 spacewalks on an asteroid, all I heard was crickets.
Yeah.
So what do you think
What's the difference?
Yeah.
We were not at war. I was not marching in the streets of Columbia, South Carolina, as we were when President Kennedy announced we were going to the moon. We were in the midst of the civil rights era. You know, there was hatred being spewed all over the streets of the United States. We were at war in another country, and we were racing the Russians, the Soviets back then. We are not racing the Soviets. We have no, hopefully we will not have an enemy like we had then. Hopefully we will not go back into the streets in racial discord again, although I can't guarantee that sometimes. And definitely, you know, this nation will be very cautious before it enters into another war like Vietnam or some others that people could cite. Significant difference in time and conditions.
Thank you. I see my time's expired. Thank you.
I now recognize Ms. Brownlee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, General Bolden, for your courageous service to our country. I really do appreciate it very much. I have some questions about the budget request for construction and environmental compliance and restoration. Specifically, I'm very interested in the budget request for cleanup of the Santa Susana Field Lab. This has been affecting my district for decades. NASA's original fiscal year 2013 request included $5.5 million for the Santa Susana Field Laboratory cleanup. And I understand that the administration has not yet released its fiscal year 2013 spending plan, and that the appropriations law enacted March 26 gives NASA 45 days to do so. So a couple of questions here. Will NASA allocate the $15.5 million request in 2013 to the Santa Susana Field Lab cleanup, and what activities does NASA intend to complete with those funds? And then further, will NASA's 2014 request of $20.6 million for the cleanup keep the project on schedule for completion by 2017? And what are what activities does NASA expect to complete with the 2014 year funds? And if Congress does not provide NASA with a full amount requested for 2014, how would the impact of NASA's ability to stay on track for cleanup completion in 2017?
Congresswoman, you know, I'm as dedicated as anyone to making sure that this planet is as good as it can be, and that life here is good. As far as I know, and I will get back to you for the record, we have not made any proposal for a change in the funding dedicated to Santa Susana. The last time I talked to the folk in the office responsible for that, we were on target for completion of the cleanup by 2017, and that's what we intend to do.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I would love it if at any time you were available to come visit the site and see it for yourself.
I'd be glad to come.
Thank you.
I want to thank the administrator for his valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have additional questions. It's already been expressed to me that they will. So we will ask you to respond to those in writing. The record will remain open for 2 weeks for additional comments and written questions from members. The witness is excused and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon and welcome to Administrator Bolden. Before I begin, I want to offer my congratulations to NASA and to Orbital on the test flight of the Antares launcher on Sunday. The successful test flight speaks well of the teamwork among Orbital, NASA, and the Wallops Flight Facility and the FAA, and including the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport and the Virginia Commercial Space Flight Authority. So congratulations. Now today we're meeting to review the $17.7 billion request for NASA's fiscal year 2014 budget. And I know, General Bolden, that it's not been easy getting to this point. With sequestration and the late resolution of the fiscal 2013 budget, we in Congress have not provided you with the optimal conditions under which to plan and implement NASA's inspiring portfolio of missions. But here we are. Now, I've said before, and I'll say it again, that our investments in research and development, including space, are investments in innovation, jobs, and future economic growth. If we skimp on the input side of the equation, we can't expect positive changes in our nation's capacity for innovation and growth. That's why we need to take a careful look at how the resources requested match the program content included in the fiscal year 2014 budget request. At the full committee hearing just last week on FY 2014 budget requests for science agencies, the President's science advisor, Dr. Holdren, testified, and I quote, "NASA has long had the problem of 20 pounds of mission in a 10-pound budget, and they continue to. I share that concern. This proposal includes requests for NASA's key priorities, the James Webb Space Telescope, the International Space Station, and the Space Launch System, and Orion Crew Vehicle, along with its science and aeronautics programs and its infrastructure support. I worry that for all the work that NASA is tasked with doing to move forward towards fulfilling the 2010 NASA Reauthorization Act, that the agency is also cherry-picking aspects of that strategic plan that it finds favorable while undercutting other priorities in the law. For example, the 2014 budget request includes $105 million as a down payment to fund initial concept work on a mission that would demonstrate solar electric propulsion technology that is needed to capture a small asteroid, move it into translunar region, and then potentially use that asteroid as a target destination for the first crewed flight of the SLS and Orion system. In addition, the request includes $820 million a year over the next several years to fund the development of commercial crew capability for transporting astronauts to and from the ISS, a significant increase from the $400 and $500 million range that Congress has been willing to authorize and appropriate for those activities in the last 3 fiscal years. My fear is that I've already gotten to the 20 pounds of program content that Dr. Holdren was talking about in NASA's $17.7 billion request. And that doesn't include the unfunded new responsibilities for developing climate sensors that NASA's Earth Science program has inherited from NOAA, the $50 million increase required for full reimbursement now to the Department of Energy for resuming the domestic production of material that's needed to power deep space missions, or the 29% increase over fiscal year 2012 actual spending levels that's being sought for NASA's space technology program. To NASA's credit, the agency has been making progress in managing schedule and cost on its activities. The Government Accountability Office just recently issued a report that stated that NASA had success in the last 2 years in launching missions on cost or on schedule. I commend the agency and the contractor workforce on this progress. And yet the GAO also says that sustaining the changes that have led to these successes will be challenging within a period of flat or decreasing budgets and with the ongoing work on several large-scale and complex projects. Should any of the JWST, ISS, or SLS Orion programs experience a hiccup, the financial impact can have, and this is quoting GAO, cascading effects on the rest of the portfolio. Indeed, GAO's word of caution gives me pause since I don't see a lot of flexibility within the 2014 request for dealing with that situation. I hope today's discussion can clarify the rationale for the proposed asteroid and capture retrieval initiative proposed in the 2014 budget, and particularly how it contributes to detecting and characterizing 90% of near-Earth asteroids 140 meters in diameter or less. We've heard testimony in this committee about that, as set in policy and successive authorization acts. In these tight budgetary times, we need to be sure the proposed approach will be the most efficient means of achieving those objectives. So I look forward, Administrator Bolton, to what I hope will be a beginning of an active dialogue on both the policy and resources.
The Subcommittee on Space will come to order. Well, good afternoon. Welcome to today's hearing entitled An Overview of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration Budget for Fiscal Year 2014. In front of you are packets containing the written testimony, biographies, and required truth and testimony disclosures for today's witness. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Well, good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to our hearing today, and I especially want to thank our witness, NASA Administrator Charlie Bolden, for joining us. I know many people put in a lot of effort preparing for these hearings, and we appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to appear before the subcommittee. The purpose of today's hearing is to review the administration's fiscal year 2014 budget request for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and to examine its priorities and challenges. Before we review the details of the NASA request, I feel it is necessary to express my disappointment that the administration has been unable to fulfill its responsibilities for a timely budget as required under the Budget and Accounting Act. In the future, I hope the administration will be on time. This year, NASA is requesting $17.7 billion, a decrease of $55 million from fiscal year 2012 and $733 million less than fiscal year 2011. In a time of budgetary restraints such as the one our nation is facing, we must ensure that every agency is doing its part, and I believe the top line request for NASA is fair in this regard. There are several areas of the request that I believe require serious deliberation and thoughtful debate. Within the Human Operations and Exploration Mission Directorate, I am most concerned with the request for the Commercial Crew Program, the Space Launch System, and the Orion Crew Capsule. Certainly the successful launches of both SpaceX and Orbital Sciences are significant milestones, and they should be applauded for those achievements. However, I continue to be concerned about the strategy NASA is employing to fund crew transportation systems. We must recognize the times in which we are operating, and funding multiple companies to develop these systems is no longer, if funding multiple companies to develop these systems is no longer feasible, we must reevaluate our strategy. Our first priority must be getting American astronauts launching on American rockets from American soil as soon as safely possible. I am skeptical about continuing to develop a market as broad and as deep as NASA suggests because I think it could delay that goal. This is a conversation I anticipate revisiting as the committee prepares for the NASA
required to support NASA and in effectively implementing its challenging and inspiring portfolio. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield, well, not the balance of my time, but I do yield.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards. I now recognize the chairman of the full committee for a statement, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. America is a nation of explorers, and space is the next frontier. Just last week, NASA announced the discovery of new worlds beyond our solar system that resemble our own planet. We in Congress need to be diligent in our review of the administration's proposed budget for NASA to ensure that this agency remains focused on its primary mission, space exploration. In April 2010, almost 3 years ago, President Obama addressed the NASA workforce at the Kennedy Space Center. He stated that the next mission for American astronauts beyond the International Space Station was an asteroid and canceled NASA's many years of work to return to the surface of the moon. Last December, the National Academy of Sciences review of NASA's strategic direction made the following observation. The committee has seen little evidence that a current stated goal for NASA's human spaceflight program, namely to visit an asteroid by 2025, has been widely accepted as a compelling destination by NASA's own workforce, by the nation as a whole, or by the international community. On the international front, there appears to be continued enthusiasm for a mission to the moon, but not for an asteroid mission, end quote. Not having found a suitable asteroid for NASA astronauts, the President's budget now proposes a robotic asteroid retrieval mission to bring one closer to the moon. NASA's budget does not identify where the funding for such an asteroid retrieval mission will come from, but it is likely to detract from NASA's human spaceflight projects, the International Space Station, Orion Crew Vehicle, and Space Launch System. Further, the President's budget requests over $1.8 billion for NASA's Earth science programs. How does this high level of spending affect other NASA priorities, especially planetary exploration? Here are the priorities for NASA's exploration missions that have been consistent in congressional authorizations for the past 8 years. We need to make the International Space Station both an international and scientific success that will enable further exploration beyond Earth orbit. We need to build new systems to once again launch American astronauts on American rockets as soon as possible. Today, the U.S. pays Russia $63 million to take each of our
authorization later this year. Additionally, I'm concerned about the request for the Space Launch System and the Orion Crew capsule. While Congress continues to insist that these two programs be priorities, NASA has once again offered a budget that does not demonstrate the sustained commitment to their development. I remain committed to ensuring our nation has a robust exploration program, and I am curious what milestones or important testing NASA believes can be pushed out in the schedule to accommodate the lower requests. I am also troubled by NASA's requested reductions in the Science, Aeronautics, and Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorates. While asking for $105 million for an asteroid retrieval mission that was announced seemingly out of the blue. This request was not accompanied by a budget profile, technical plan, or long-term strategy. Yet NASA has asked Congress to commit to funding the first steps. I look forward to hearing more about this mission and how NASA intends to cover the $2.6 billion that the Keck Institute for Space Studies estimated it would cost. In the Science Mission Directorate, the administration has requested authority to transfer several climate sensors from the troubled Joint Polar Satellite System and the Deep Space Climate Observatory out of the NOAA budget and assign them to the Earth Science Program budget. The budget request also transfers Landsat Data Continuity Mission follow-on activities from the U.S. Geological Survey to NASA, and the development infrastructure for radioisotope power systems from the Department of Energy to NASA. So I'm worried that NASA is footing the bill for other agency requirements, all while being asked to take an overall budget cut. Finally, I'm concerned by the growth of the space technology program. The request for the space technology program this year is a 62% increase over the appropriation it received in fiscal year 2012. This is a significant amount of growth in only 2 years. Although NASA has announced that it will organize space technology as a mission directorate, it has not requested authority to do so in the upcoming authorization bill, and it is not entirely clear how the projects in space technology differ from those in other mission directorates. Mr. Administrator, like you, I am committed to ensuring that our nation has a robust space program that will continue to lead the world for generations. I am concerned, however, that NASA has neglected congressional funding priorities and been distracted by new and questionable missions that detract from our ultimate deep space exploration goals. These distractions also take up precious lines in the budget at a time when NASA can least afford it. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentlelady from Maryland, Ms. Edwards, for an opening statement.